Welcome to Eye on Africa, France 24's program focused on the continent. I'm Charlie James, and here's what's ahead. Chad's president speaks out against ethnic violence in his country. Dozens were killed this week in the latest incident of intercommunal violence in the east. A child YouTube star dies of malaria in Burundi, shining a spotlight on the country's epidemic. The disease has killed 1,800 people there so far this year. And nearly 100 candidates to compete in Tunisia's upcoming presidential election. Now that the registration deadline has passed, the campaigning can begin. And we begin this evening in Chad. At least 37 people have been killed this week in fighting between rival ethnic groups in the east of the country. This latest violence, part of an ongoing rift between herders and farmers competing for resources in the area. President Idriss Déby addressed the deaths on Friday, which was also Chad's Independence Day. He said the violence broke out over 3 days in the eastern province of Wadi and on the border with Sudan.
This fighting is a national concern. We are witnessing a new phenomenon of tensions between communities and different ethnic groups. And it's spreading. Inter-community conflicts are no longer just localized in one region or province of Chad, but practically throughout the entire country.
Déby added he will visit the area in the future, but did not give any time frame for doing so. The death of a child YouTube star in Burundi is drawing attention to the malaria crisis there. 6-year-old Darcy Irakoze was celebrated for his popular comedy sketches and also performed in theaters. He was diagnosed with malaria on Wednesday and died the next day. The number of malaria cases in Burundi is staggering. According to the World Health Organization, more than 5 million cases have been recorded just since January. But Burundi's government disputes that number, as Laurent Bestacher explains.
At only 6 years old, Darcy Irakoze had already attained internet fame in Burundi, his videos regularly garnering tens of thousands of views. But on Wednesday, the young YouTube star contracted malaria and passed away 24 hours later. He was among the latest victims of an outbreak that's already infected over 5 million people and killed 1,800 in Burundi this year, according to the United Nations.
In terms of national health policy, malaria remains the leading cause of death.
According to the World Health Organization, Burundi's malaria crisis is now as serious as the deadly Ebola outbreak in neighboring DRC. Yet Burundian authorities, which have disputed the figures given by the UN, have so far refused to declare an epidemic.
We can see that there are people who continue to die, but only the Minister of Public Health can proclaim an epidemic.
Malaria remains one of the deadliest diseases in Africa, killing over 2,500 children each day. The last official malaria epidemic in Burundi was declared in 2017. Some 1.8 million cases and 700 deaths were recorded, less than half the death toll of the current outbreak.
For the 25th week in a row, Algerians protested against their government on Friday. High temperatures and the upcoming Eid holiday meant turnout this week was not as high as at previous demonstrations. The movement has already seen the resignation of the country's president and the detention of numerous officials and elites. Still, demonstrators turn out to demand a complete overhaul of leadership. A stunning total of 98 candidates have declared for Tunisia's presidential election in mid-September. Paperwork had to be submitted by 6 p.m. Friday, so now the campaigning can begin. The crowded field is competing to take up the mantle left by deceased head of state, Beji Caid Essebsi. Karis Garland takes a look at some of the top contenders.
A well-known face to Tunisians, Youssef Chahed, the youngest prime minister in the country's history, is a front-runner in this presidential election.
It is a responsibility, and I know what responsibility is. I have had 3 years of it in a country that is fighting terrorism, going through a tough political situation, and was on the edge when I took power.
Shahed has positioned himself as a dynamic figure, bringing hope to the young through economic reform. But in recent months, his popularity has flagged in the wake of creeping unemployment and inflation. Shahed created the Tahia Tunes party, the second largest party in the Tunisian parliament behind the moderate Islamist group Ennahda. Abdel Fattah Mourou, interim head of parliament and founding member of Ennahda, will pose a significant threat to Shahed in this election. Mourou is his party's first ever candidate for the presidency. But if Tunisians decide to reject mainstream parties in this contest, there are a number of outside figures who could do well. 56-year-old Nabil Karoui, for example, the businessman is known as the Tunisian Berlusconi by his critics. A populist telecoms mogul, Karoui was leading in some polls back in June. A more established bet is Abdelkarim Zbidi, the sitting defence minister who currently enjoys the support of secular parties such as Nida Tunes. With the candidates declared, the electoral battle begins. Elections are set to take place on September 15. If no candidate wins a majority, a runoff vote will be held by early November.
The United States and Britain said Friday that there is a steady erosion of due process in Tanzania. Of particular concern, the arrest of a respected journalist and government critic. Eric Kabendera, known for his unflinching coverage of the nation's president, was charged this week with organized crime and financial offenses. He had been arrested by plainclothes police at his home in July. Kabendera's detention provoked outrage, with rights groups demanding his release. Thousands of babies in South Africa are abandoned each year. Some are simply left in the streets, others placed in overwhelmed and overcrowded orphanages. But charities such as Door of Hope are trying to provide a last resort for desperate parents, a so-called baby box, which alerts workers when a child is left there.
There are 17 little mouths to feed at the Door of Hope orphanage in Johannesburg. This place provides a temporary home for abandoned babies, and today they have a new arrival.
Last night, around 8:30, the center went off, and then they looked at the camera screen only to find that there's a baby, and then they just went in front of the house and go get the baby. The baby arrived through the baby box.
The charity built the baby box in 1999 as a safe place for mothers to leave unwanted children. And since then, it has received over 200 babies.
Whenever there's a baby here, then the center will alert us in the house. That's how we know that there's a baby in the box.
Across South Africa, thousands of children are abandoned at orphanages, hospitals, or even in the streets. There are no official figures, but NGOs believe around 3,000 babies survive abandonment each year. Many more die before being rescued. In one of the most unequal societies in the world, charities say the issue partly stems from the problems some mothers themselves face.
It's important to remember that they've been abandoned themselves. They've been abandoned by the partner of the father of their child. They've been abandoned often by their family. And they've been abandoned by their communities and society as a whole.
Tuli Mahlangu will miss out on seeing her granddaughter grow up. Her daughter fell pregnant at 21, but neither of them could raise the baby. So together they decided to give the little girl up for adoption, a choice that remains taboo in South Africa.
They consider adoption as you are throwing a baby away. I chose not to follow through, break the chains. I chose, and I'm happier.
One day, if she wants to, their little girl can track down her biological family, a choice the babies abandoned at the Door of Hope will never have.
And finally, we go to Kenya. Recently, something extraordinary was found inside a plain wooden drawer at the Nairobi National Museum, a monstrous jawbone from a prehistoric mega carnivore that researchers only this year declared a new species.
Deep in the storage of Nairobi's National Museum, This unassuming jaw contains an archaeological gem. The giant jawbone of Africa's largest ever predator, a prehistoric carnivore 3 times larger than a polar bear. At 23 million years old, this discovery made headlines the world over and is considered essential for developing understanding of the evolution of mammals.
It shows the wealth of Africa in terms of our past ecosystems and what used to be in Africa, and we can do reconstructions of the environment from these, the possible diets from these, and what other animals they would have interacted with.
But this important fossil was not unearthed this year. It had actually been in the museum for over 40 years before it was recognised as a new species. Museum staff knew the bones were something special. They just didn't know exactly what, and lacked the resources to properly investigate. There are only 7 paleontologists in Kenya. The museum has not changed much since the 1960s, when famed paleontologist Louis Leakey first started stockpiling his findings. A card-based, handwritten filing system is still in place. These crocodile skeletons are another important asset of the museum, which have helped further understand the evolution of animals and the landscapes they inhabited.
This is a skull of a modern crocodile, and I want to show you at about 3 million years the kind of crocodiles that used to exist during that time.
Between 7,000 and 10,000 new fossils arrive in the museum's laboratory every year, and the task of cleaning and logging each specimen is painstaking. With a backlog that could yet take years to work through, the hope is that many more unidentified evolutionary treasures lie in wait.
That's all for this edition, but stay tuned. More news in just a few minutes.